Glass is a new psychological superhero movie directed by the one, the only M. Night Shaymalan. If you can think back to the year 2000, M. Night Shaymalan also directed this little film called Unbreakable. Unbreakable was a classic ahead of its time. This movie, Glass, is the follow-up, the direct sequel to that movie 19 years ago in 2000. It's also a sequel to the movie Split, which it came out a few years ago, back in 2017, I believe. That movie starred James McAvoy, and holy shit, he's in this movie too. Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis reprised their roles from Unbreakable and the cameo from Split in Bruce Willis's case. And you have Anya Taylor-Joy once again reprising her role from Split as well. I'm gonna do as best I can to describe the synopsis of this movie without actually giving things away, because I feel like this is a movie where it's best to be vague about. So in this movie, we catch up with David Dunn 19 years after the fatal accident that somehow inexplicably gave him superpowers. He's trying to track down the Horde in Philadelphia. For people who don't know what the Horde is, if you watch Split, the Horde is a collection of personalities all rolled up into the body of one man, and it all comes out in this one personality called the Beast. One thing leads to another, and both he and the Beast end up being captured and put into this psych ward. What do you know? Mr. Glass himself is also there at this psych ward, and they're being evaluated by this psychologist who's trying to convince them that their powers aren't real. Her specialty is taking people who believe that they have superpowers and basically convincing them, no, it's all in your head, it's just delusions of grandeur. Really all I want to say about the plot of this movie, because like I said, it's best to be vague. I have such a love-hate relationship with M. Night Shaymalan. It's kind of crazy. Half of his movies, I look at them and I'm kind of like, man, that was like an underrated masterpiece. It's like criminally slept on. And then the other half of his movies, I just take a look at them and I just go, why? Just never allow this man to direct anything ever again. Regardless of all of that, I was definitely really excited to see Glass. I love Unbreakable. Unbreakable is one of my all-time favorite comic book movies. Definitely the hype and the anticipation, for me at least, it was real. There's definitely a lot of things to love about this movie. There are some ways that M. Night Shaymalan hits that patch of brilliance that he's known for in this movie, and that made me oh so happy. He doesn't always hit it, but when he hits it, it's just, man, it's great stuff here. Should start with the performances. All of the performances in the movie are A1. Of course, you would expect it to be. It's like M. Night Shaymalan always brings out the best in Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis, I can tell you definitively, is not sleepwalking through this role like he's done in other roles over the last few years. He's actually giving good effort. You can tell he's committing to the direction that M. Night Shyamalan is trying to push his character. I really love some of the stuff that they did with David Dunn, especially in the first act of the movie. It was kind of fascinating to see what this dude's life was after 19 years. Likewise, Samuel L. Jackson as Mr. Glass was great when he was in the movie. When he actually shows up in the movie and he starts doing his Mr. Glass thing, he cements himself as one of the best on-screen portrayals of a supervillain like ever. That gotta be real and let you know that James McAvoy once again steals the show as Kevin, or as the Horde, or whatever you're supposed to call him. If you loved him in Split, you're definitely gonna love him in this movie, because he doubles down on everything that made him great in Split, and he does it twice as good in this one. Somehow this dude is able to blend all these different personalities, all these different attitudes. He really does convince you that he is multiple people all at once. Outside of a couple of unnecessary POV shots, I love the way this film was directed and shot. You can tell when it comes to the shot composition and the shot structure in this movie that it was done by somebody with a real keen attention to detail. And that makes sense. It is Shyamalan after all. He's all about the details, especially the little ones. Shot by shot, frame by frame, you can tell that a lot of meticulously crafted details are put into every single scene. I really love that about this movie. Love, love, love what M. Night Shyamalan did with the color scheme in this movie. The color scheme is just, holy shit, it's brilliant. He takes the color scheme in this movie and he uses it to inform the story and inform the characters. The color scheme in this movie, it's telling its own story. It helps inform the characters and influence their actions, their dialogue. It just adds that extra sense of Shyamalan personality to every single scene. I feel like your enjoyment of this movie, or your lack of enjoyment of this movie, might depend on what kind of movie you actually want this to be. You go into this movie expecting it to be a Marvel movie, or a DC movie, or an X-Men movie, or whatever other kind of comic book movie that you are used to seeing. Get that thought out of your head, because this movie is nothing like that. If you're going into this movie expecting it to be a spiritual successor and sequel to Unbreakable and Split, well, then I feel like there's going to be more good stuff in here for you. This is not an action thriller. This is not an entertaining, fun type of movie. This is a movie that is kind of dark, kind of heavy, definitely psychological, and very methodical and slow burn in its approach. If that pisses you off, or if that puts you off, again, you might want to skip this one. The nitpick that I do have with this movie is that some of the characters, namely some of the supporting characters in the movie, they feel like add-ons, like they feel like they're not organically woven into the story. They feel like they're in the story, and then they feel like they're there only to set up certain things in the third act. But I can't deny that about, I don't know, 3/4 of the way through the movie, I was just sitting there like, why are these people in the movie? Sucks to say because I was a big fan of Casey's character from Split. I do like some of the scenes with her, and I'm not saying there aren't any interesting scenes with them overall. Ultimately, they feel kind of pointless to the overarching narrative of the entire film, and unfortunately, they're also in the movie quite a lot for them to be pointless, so I don't know, I just felt like I should mention that. Also, I have an interesting question for anybody out there who's actually seen the movie. Why is the movie actually called Glass? Like I said, when Mr. Glass is in the movie, he's great, but unfortunately, Samuel L. Jackson doesn't really get much to do as Glass until, like, the second act of the movie. And then he takes over the second act, and then he's great in the third act. For the first half or 3/4 almost of this movie, it's kind of like, where's Mr. Glass? Why is this movie called Glass? It feels like James McAvoy's character is actually the centerpiece. This is kind of that Winter Soldier thing all over again for me, where I see a movie like The Winter Soldier and I kind of go, you know what? Winter Soldier pops up in the movie and he has some fight scenes with Cap. It feels more like a subplot than an actual story point. Like the actual point of the movie is Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. And you walk out of the movie and you end up going, well, I mean, I know it's called Winter Soldier, but why is it actually called Winter Soldier? Unfortunately, one of the big problems I have with this movie is the overuse of exposition and some of the ham-fisted, heavy-handed, in-your-face dialogue. One of the best things about this movie is the way that it delves into comic book mythology, the way it uses comic book mythology to explore our inner selves. Unfortunately, this also lends itself to the dialogue. A lot of the dialogue in this film is written to be very spoon-fed. I feel like M. Night Shaymalan took my hand and tried to carry me through all of the heavier scenes in the movie and didn't trust the audience to be able to figure some shit out on their own. Everything is so obvious. Everything has to be laid out. Everything has to be explained and then over-explained. Not gonna lie, that did irritate the ever-living shit out of me after a while. Third act of this movie is definitely the messiest and the most jumbled part of the movie. Like, the first 2 acts are pretty good, and then the third act, it just goes haywire, and there's a bunch of different shit, and I feel like fans are either going to be on board with it or they're not going to be on board with it. Some of the twists work for me. Some of them, I was just kind of like, Shaymalan, why are you doing this? Why? Why'd you do that? Shaymalan going Shaymalan, I guess. Unfortunately, I can't say that I loved the movie. I feel like it's too flawed. I feel like it falls short in its execution. However, I will say I had a good time at the theater, and I'm going to put this movie in the Silver Age for Man of Steel. What is your favorite M. Night Shaymalan film? Like and subscribe to the Superfan Show, and as always, if you like what you see, tell me how you feel, and stay tuned to hear more from the Man of Steel. Peace!